So, self-proclaimed geek is with me. Andy, very good to see you. I just want to go back to that Northern Powerhouse bit of research. I mean, obviously, levelling up isn't all about money, but it is disturbing that in many parts of the UK, they will, even after the money's allocated that you talk about in this report, they'll still be worse off compared to 2016. That is a problem, isn't it?
With this evening, Robert, thank you for the geek comment. The nerd is my preferred, actually, way of describing myself.
There's a neek, which is what you've got to aspire to. It's part nerd, part geek.
Next time I'm on. So on those numbers, they're still being worked through. How the shared prosperity fund will work through in each region. What we can say, though, government is committed to matching what was done from the EU, but we're now able to do two things. One, to direct those funds more directly to the needs of particular areas to establish greater pride in place. And two, we'll give those local areas discretion over how to spend those monies.
And just to be clear, that transfer of power for you, I mean, is that the most important thing that's been announced today?
I would say, of the long list of stuff that's in this
fabulous
127-page...
unmissable read.
One for the weekend. I'd say the single most important one is this further great leap forward on putting power in local leaders and local people's hands through extending the mayors that we have, through giving them greater powers, and by having more of those devolution deals among counties.
Because you've studied, you know, actually probably more deeply and longer than pretty much anybody I know, why we have this appalling gap between income, wealth and productivity in some parts of the UK compared to London and the South East, much worse gaps than, for example, in many other rich countries. And how much of that is because too much decision-making has been centralised here?
It's a core element. It's not the only element, I would say.
So talk us through what are the other flaws that have to be fixed?
Well, ultimately, you know, the starting point here, the foundation stone is a strong economy, creation of jobs, the creation of high pay.
But we had years and years of stable growth in this country, and these inequalities got worse.
True. But to an extent, government itself has not helped matters. So right now, spending, for example, on research and development, highly concentrated in the Golden Triangle. If you want to fertilise, to lubricate, to support those clusters of activity all across the UK, more of that money needs to go beyond the Golden Triangle. And in today's report, that's exactly now what is going to happen. Because where you spend on innovation in clusters, that will ultimately show up in
Can I just ask
jobs.
very briefly, because we've got lots more to pick up on this after the break, but how do you do that without damaging some of the great centres of excellence? Because on the one hand, you want to create new centres of excellence, but you don't want to do that at the detriment of great existing institutions.
Now, that's true. And it is the case that we lead the world on with our fantastic universities, research institutes. The crown jewels need protecting, absolutely. The good news is that the government's R&D budget is going up, the pie is getting bigger, and therefore, of those increments, more can go to the north, to the Midlands, to Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales.
Brilliant. I'm going to pick up on all of this in just a minute. Don't go away. Much more with Andy Haldane. We'll be talking about cost of living, possibly the future of path of interest rates. That matters to most of us. Tons more with Amber and Rosanna too. Don't go away. Welcome back. I'm delighted Andy Haldane is still here. Andy, the greatest example, I think, in modern times of levelling up was the unification of East and West Germany, where living standards of East Germany over many years were raised amazingly. But in West Germany, the consequence also for many years was stagnation. Can we really do this without actually slowing growth in London and the South East? Genuinely?
I think we can, and we must. I mean, the truth is, as you know, you visit these places, there are pockets of, opportunity all across the UK, people and places. And there's absolutely no reason why, with a nudge, a slug of money here, support there, that opportunity can't be released.
What's a mission? What's a mission?
It's a long-term aim to do something, like putting a person on the moon.
But what explain to me, so you've got these 12 missions.
Yeah.
So various targets, narrowing gaps between rich and poor being one of the most important ones by 2030. It's a long time away. Tell our viewers why they should believe any of this will actually happen.
Well, two things. You know, these differences are deep and entrenched. 70 years of entrenched differences. It'll take a while, at least 10 years, to close them, to begin to close them. And the problem has not in the past been a lack of policy. We've had loads of policies to do this, but they have not stood the test of time. They have not had longevity.
So why would these stand the test of time?
These missions are going to be set in statute, and government will report on them annually, whether we're on the critical path to get there.
And if they don't get... And what happens if we're not on that path? Who gets punished? What's the sanction?
Well, the question gets asked of government then, you know, are you either reneging on your mission, pretty public admission of failure, or if not, what is the remediation plan to put us back on that critical path? That doesn't preordain success. It's a pretty potent statutory set of incentives for government to stick the
Will
course.
this have, do you think, the force of, for example, the kind of tests that are put on the government over climate change, where there is a committee that reports every year and says whether we're on course or off course, and it seems to have an influence?
That's the hope. That's the hope. This is not quite as simple as net zero. There's multiple missions rather than a singular mission. But the hope is, in the same way as that was the golden thread, is now the golden thread through all of Whitehall, that levelling up also becomes the golden thread running through Whitehall now as well.
Now, I want to talk to you a bit about cost of living, which is on all our minds. Anushka's got a couple of things for us first.
Oh, yeah, I just wanted to show you another quote from that Sun story that you mentioned, the interview with the Prime Minister. Harry Cole, the political editor, asked Boris Johnson whether he could sustain Cummings' Dom bombs. I've not heard them call that before. That's obviously a tax from his former advisor, to which Boris Johnson said, I am focused not on my critics. I won't accept criticism from the Labour Party or anywhere else. My job is to get on with what the public elected me to do. The best answer to any criticism is to deliver, which I have to say, Amber, suggests he's not going to trigger a confidence vote in himself. But after you said that, I did message someone in your party to ask whether it would be possible for him to trigger one, and I'm told technically not, but maybe he could get some of his own side to put in letters of no confidence. And let me just show you the Financial Times front page on what you were talking about. Robert, Sunak and Bank of England work in tandem to head off cost of living catastrophe.
So, first of all, tell us, how serious is this cost of living catastrophe?
It's serious. I mean, you see that in the numbers that Anushka mentioned earlier on, in terms of how it hits, in particular, some of the poorer households.
Yep.
And there are lessons. We've been here before, in the 1970s twice, when energy price spikes. We know the costs of that were felt for many, many years thereafter. There are lessons from that too, of course. And the key one is to not let the inflationary cat out of the bag. You know, and that's...
So just to be clear, because obviously when you put up interest rates for people who pay interest, that actually squeezes your cost of living. But your view seems to be that the Bank of England should continue to raise interest rates.
It is. And that's partly because if you get behind the curve on that, if you do let the cat out of the bag, ultimately, longer term, that leaves interest rates need to remain higher for longer, and that makes the cost of living crisis worse. Let's not embed this forever. At the same time, though, support is needed for households in some way, shape or form. There is a combination of going tight with interest rates, but perhaps cutting some slack through other measures of various types.
So broadly, if, and I think from memory, the Bank of England could put up interest rates tomorrow, in fact. I'm pretty right. I think I'm right in saying if they do that, you would expect the Treasury to sort of offset that through maybe the benefit system temporarily or something of that sort.
Well, certainly, I think the recipe that we didn't follow in the 70s, that we should follow now, is tighter monetary policy to prevent this getting embedded, alongside some support for those households that most need it.
Most need. I mean, this is obviously a major issue at the moment, cost of living. And actually, one thing I should just point out before we get on to this is, believe it or not, Harry Cole, the political editor of The Sun, who I just referenced, he's now clarified that he got it wrong. The Prime Minister didn't say 23 election, he said 24 election.
Oh, OK.
So we're sort of back playing the long game.
Right. Glad that's clear.
Is, slightly amusing. Anyway.
Heard it here first.
But, I mean, a combination of rising interest rates, energy prices, I mean, inflation we haven't seen at levels since the early 90s. I mean, this is pretty ghastly stuff, isn't it?
It is ghastly stuff, and I think the energy prices are particularly devastating. And Greg Jackson earlier was very clear that the cause of that is basically about the increase in the gas price. But the public cannot afford to pay for these costs. So I'm really encouraged to hear that the Chancellor and the Bank of England are going to do something about it. But the other thing, if I may say, that I'd love to hear from them is something about energy efficiency for households and for businesses, because we have some of the leakiest households and therefore the biggest bills. So we need that addressed as well.
Can I just ask you one question, which sort of confuses some people? We've got an extraordinary squeeze on cost of living, living standards. And yet we're expecting still relatively rapid overall growth this year. Is that overall growth sustainable against the backdrop where people simply stop spending in, you know, the household sector being squeezed in that way?
Well, I think this does boil down to the levelling up agenda we were discussing earlier on, because it can be sustained if we do something to tackle our long-standing problems of productivity, of skills, of education.
Believe it or not, I've been told we've run out of time just when we're getting the answer to that question we all wanted to know. That's it. Tomorrow we'll have Johnson and Sunak's first step at easing the cost of living crisis, measures to limit energy price rise. It'll be our first chance to assess whether the Prime Minister can make sensible decisions while the sword of Damocles is hanging over him. What do you reckon? See you next week.